The conference room was silent except for the hum of the projector. My 6 teammates were gone, cut in one sentence, and the VP smiled as he slid their work across the table toward me. "You'll handle it, Pamela. You're our rock." My hands shook under the fluorescent lights. No raise, no help. Just the weight of 7 jobs and a hollow compliment. But as I stared at the report he called company property, I almost laughed. Because he didn't know. What he just reassigned wasn't the company's. It was mine. Before I go on, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Comment below, then subscribe for the truth. They announced it in the kind of meeting where the air itself feels rehearsed. Todd, the new VP with his perfect haircut and cheap charisma, stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room like a man unveiling a miracle. "Effective today, we're streamlining the reconciliation department," he said, his voice crisp, rehearsed, merciless. My 6 team members froze. I felt the breath leave my body before the words even finished forming. "We'll consolidate responsibilities under Pamela," he added, flashing me that fake smile executives use when they've already cashed the bonus. My teammates, people who'd spent years catching the financial mistakes that kept this company alive, were gone with one sentence. No warning, no transition. Just gone. I was the streamlined solution. Todd gestured toward me. "She's a rock star. She can handle it." The CFO chuckled. HR nodded approvingly, probably drafting my burnout plan before lunch. I sat there, every muscle stiff, smiling through the sting of humiliation while my heart hammered like I was falling off a ledge. Around the table, eyes darted away. No one wanted to meet the gaze of the woman they'd just buried under a mountain of other people's jobs. Todd kept talking about efficiency metrics while I stared at the slide behind him. My own software was on it, the one I built after hours, the one they'd just stripped my name from. And in that instant, my anger turned cold, because what they thought was theirs had never stopped being mine. A week after the layoffs, the whispers started. I could feel them before I heard them. Conversations would pause when I walked by, then pick up again in a lower tone. Todd had started calling me legacy staff in meetings, a polite way of saying obsolete. He told people I was slow to adapt, that my methods were old school. Funny, the same methods that had saved this company from 3 failed audits. HR asked me to take on mentorship duties for the younger analysts, as if babysitting interns was compensation for losing my entire team. Todd's favorite line was, "Pamela has decades of experience, but we need speed." I kept my face neutral, even when my jaw ached from clenching. During one meeting, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We'll keep your old system running for now, but we'll rebrand it under corporate IP. No need to overcomplicate who built what, right?" My pen slipped in my hand, leaving a small ink mark on my notes. He smiled, thinking he'd won. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about downsizing. It was about erasing me. At lunch, I sat in the cafeteria, pushing cold salad around my plate, while 2 analysts at the next table joked about the dinosaur who won't retire. One of them caught my eye and turned red, but the damage was done. That night, I stayed late, pretending to finish reports. But really, I was scrolling through old emails. My inbox was a time capsule of ignored warnings, unpaid overtime, and forgotten appreciation messages. Buried inside was an email from 4 years ago with a subject line that read, "Intellectual Property Confirmation." It was from legal, confirming that any tools or software created off hours belonged solely to the creator. My fingers hovered over the attachment. When I opened it, there it was, a PDF with my name printed in black and white. Pamela Rhodes, Recon Leet, copyright 2020. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from relief. The system they were now calling corporate IP had never been theirs. I stared at the document, remembering the nights I'd coded it alone, fueled by coffee and sheer frustration at the broken systems no one else wanted to fix. I'd filed the copyright as an act of pride back then. Now it felt like destiny. The next day, Todd strutted into my cubicle uninvited, holding a glossy brochure draft. "We're showcasing our proprietary platform next month," he said. "I think it's time to make it public." He tapped the printed mock-up with my old interface design on it. "Doesn't this look sharp?" he asked, as if waiting for praise. I smiled faintly. "It looks familiar." He laughed, oblivious, and walked away, humming. The moment he turned the corner, I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my chair. The sound of the fluorescent lights above me felt louder than ever. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining it all, if maybe it wasn't worth the fight. But then, I pictured my team's empty desks, the silence where their laughter used to echo, and I knew what had to come next. They thought they'd stolen my work, my credit, and my dignity. But what they'd really done was remind me who I was before they tried to bury me. And I was just getting started. I started keeping receipts, not the kind you file for reimbursements, but the kind that tell the story people hope you never tell. Every time Todd sent an email bragging about his new software, I saved it. Every meeting where he mentioned our proprietary system, I took notes. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the loud way. My anger had cooled into something sharp and deliberate, like glass that could cut cleanly when the moment came. I worked quietly, moving through the office like a ghost no one bothered to see. Some days, Todd would stroll by my desk with his coffee, lean on the edge, and say things like, "You know, Pamela, if you'd been more open to change earlier, we might not have needed this overhaul." I'd look up, give a polite half-smile, and say, "Maybe you're right." Then I'd go back to my screen, saving another file under a folder labeled Records. Even the smallest things mattered: Slack messages, calendar invites, voice memos left by accident. Each one was another puzzle piece in a picture I was building for later. There was one moment I'll never forget. It was late Friday, the office nearly empty, when I heard Todd in the hallway bragging to someone on speakerphone. "We're launching the upgraded Recon platform next month. It's cleaner, faster, completely ours." He said it like a man describing a car he'd stolen and painted over. I sat there in the dark, listening through the thin wall, and realized how deep his arrogance ran. He truly believed I'd roll over and let him take everything. That night, I called Diana, my friend from college, who now worked as an intellectual property lawyer. I told her what was happening. She listened quietly, the way lawyers do when they already know the answer. "You still have your registration certificate?" she asked. "Every copy," I said. "Then you're covered," she replied. "Just don't warn them too early. Let them use it. The more they use it, the more they owe." Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of assurance I hadn't felt in years. After we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the framed photo of my old team on the counter. I missed them more than I expected to. They had been my proof that hard work still meant something. Now all that was left was me, and the quiet revenge of documentation. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Todd's confidence growing with every meeting. He'd mention his system to clients, drop hints to the board about a major presentation, and even send preview screenshots around like a proud artist showing off a masterpiece. What he didn't realize was that every one of those previews contained a trace of my original signature, a small watermark hidden deep in the interface, one that matched the version listed on my copyright filing. He was presenting my name to the board without even knowing it. When the day came for his big reveal, I sat in the back of the room with my notebook open, pretending to take notes. Todd stood under the bright lights, waving his hands, calling the system Harbor Point's proud innovation. The slides flashed across the screen, each one built on my framework, my design, my nights of unpaid labor. I felt my heartbeat slow, steady, focused. It wasn't fury anymore. It was clarity. I didn't interrupt. I didn't expose him. Not yet. Because the most powerful evidence is the kind that arrives right on time. That night, I went home, wrote a cease and desist letter, attached the proof of authorship, and scheduled it to send automatically at 9 a.m. Monday morning, the exact hour the board would meet to discuss expansion. As I hit schedule, I smiled for the first time in months. It was almost poetic. They thought they'd taken everything, but by Monday they'd realize the only thing they'd built was my case. Monday morning came heavy and electric, the kind of day where the air itself feels charged. The boardroom was already full when I walked in, a long glass table gleaming under two bright lights. Todd was at the head of it, sleeves rolled up, talking fast like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The CFO, Martin, sat beside him, flipping through printed slides as if speed alone could make the numbers look better. I took a seat near the far end, close enough to see the tremor in Todd's hand as he adjusted his notes. He was excited, proud, and completely unaware that his undoing was already in motion. "Today," he began, smiling like a game show host, "we present Harbor Point's newest proprietary software, our in-house reconciliation platform, Recon Lite." He said it slowly, savoring the name like it was his. The screen behind him lit up with my old interface, polished and rebranded, the watermark faint but visible in the corner. My name, in miniature code, blinking at the bottom of the display. I glanced at my phone, 8:59 a.m., and exhaled. Right on cue, the board's devices began to vibrate. First one, then another, then all of them. The CEO frowned, adjusting his glasses. "What's this?" he asked. The room quieted, the tension thick enough to taste. The general counsel opened the first email and froze. On the screen was my cease and desist notice, my registration certificate, and the official stamp of copyright from the U.S. Office of Intellectual Property. The subject line was simple: unauthorized use of copyrighted software, Pamela Rhodes, Recon Lite. No drama, just fact. Todd's smile twitched. "This must be some mistake," he said, trying to laugh. No one joined him. The CEO looked down the table. "Is this real?" he asked, voice clipped. The lawyer nodded, face pale. "It's real. The software predates her employment clause. It's hers." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Todd's mouth opened and closed, his voice caught somewhere between shock and panic. She built it for the company," he stammered. "On company time." I folded my hands calmly on the table. "After hours," I said softly. "Filed in 2020. You'll find the timestamps match the federal record." Todd turned toward me, the color draining from his face. "You can't just—" "I already did," I interrupted, steady but not cruel. I slid a small folder across the table. Inside were printed emails, the same ones where he'd written, "We'll scrub her name off the code and call it proprietary." The CEO read them in silence, his expression hardening. When he finally looked up, his eyes were flat, cold. "Todd," he said slowly, "did you authorize this?" Todd's lips trembled. "We were aligning branding." "You forged authorship on registered material," the lawyer cut in sharply. "That's infringement." A heavy pause filled the room. Outside, the faint hum of office chatter sounded distant, almost unreal. The CEO closed the folder, leaned back, and exhaled through his nose. "Everyone out," he said to the room. "Except Pamela and legal." Chairs scraped against the floor. Todd stood motionless, then gathered his things with shaky hands. For a moment our eyes met. His were wide and desperate, the look of a man realizing the spotlight he'd chased had turned into an interrogation lamp, When the door closed behind him, the CEO turned to me. "We'll be handling this internally," he said. "You'll be contacted by our counsel shortly." His tone was clipped but careful, the kind reserved for someone who's just realized they're sitting on a live grenade. I nodded, calm on the outside, my pulse roaring in my ears. As I left the boardroom, Todd was standing by the elevators, phone pressed to his ear, whispering urgently. He looked up when I passed, eyes full of disbelief. I stopped for half a second, just long enough to say, "You should check your email." He blinked, speechless, and I walked away. My heels clicked across the marble floor, steady, deliberate, like the tick of a countdown clock. In the hallway, I could hear the faint murmur of the CEO's voice, low and tight, followed by the sound of the lawyer saying, "We need to mitigate this now." For the first time in months, my shoulders loosened. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The truth had finally stood up in a room full of men who thought it never would. When I stepped outside, the wind hit my face, sharp and cold, and I smiled. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but they finally knew who owned the ground they'd been standing on, and soon they'd have to pay for every step they'd taken. By Tuesday morning, the company was a different place. The hallways that once echoed with fake laughter now carried only the sound of quiet panic. People whispered in corners, printing out documents as if paper could save them from what was coming. I arrived early, coffee in hand, watching the elevator numbers climb with the calm of someone who already knew how the story ended. When the doors opened, Todd was pacing near the conference room, face pale, tie loosened, phone glued to his ear. The instant he saw me, he froze, then turned away like I was something radioactive. I didn't stop walking. By the time I reached my desk, the CEO had called an emergency meeting. Within minutes, legal, HR, and the CFO were inside, their voices sharp and hushed behind the glass walls. I could see Todd through the window, sitting rigid in his chair, fingers clenched around a pen like it might hold him. Together. The CEO's voice cut through the silence. "You authorized an internal launch using copyrighted software you didn't own." Todd started to speak, but the general counsel raised a hand. "Please don't dig the hole any deeper." That sentence landed like a hammer. I watched the color drain from Todd's face as reality finally caught up. An hour later, HR sent an all-staff email canceling the product launch pending legal review. The company rumor mill went into overdrive. Some said the board was furious. Others said Todd was being reassigned. I didn't need to guess. I already knew the script. By noon, I got a call from Diana. "They want to settle," she said, her tone calm but satisfied. "They're offering a licensing payment and damages. $285,000. I didn't speak for a moment. The number hung in the air like a weight I wasn't sure how to hold. "Do I take it?" I asked. She smiled through the phone. "You earned it. You don't owe them the fight." I agreed. The next day, I walked into the boardroom not as an employee, but as a name on a legal agreement. The CFO looked exhausted, his collar stained with sweat. The CEO slid a folder across the table. "This is a confidential settlement," he said quietly. "You'll receive payment within 10 days. We'll also issue an internal acknowledgement of authorship." I nodded once. Todd wasn't there. His chair was empty, pushed back like someone had left in a hurry. I didn't ask where he was. Some stories write their own endings. As I stood to leave, the CEO said, "For what it's worth, Pamela, your work was remarkable. We regret how this was handled." I gave a polite smile. "So do I." Walking back to my desk for the last time, I noticed the framed motivational poster on the wall. Integrity. Doing the right thing when no one is watching. The irony nearly made me laugh. That night, I sat in my apartment with the settlement papers spread out on the table. The check amount was printed cleanly across the page. But it wasn't the number that mattered. It was the acknowledgement beneath it. Original author and license holder, Recon Light Software. My name, in ink. Finally. I ran my finger over the signature line, then folded the document neatly and slid it into a file labeled Done. Outside, the city lights blinked against the window like tiny stars. For the first time in months, I slept without waking at 3 a.m., thinking about spreadsheets and deadlines. The next morning, LinkedIn was already buzzing. Harbor Point delays product launch after internal IP dispute. One post read. A dozen former co-workers commented with thinly veiled support. Proud of the people who stand for what's right, one wrote. I scrolled once, then closed the app. There was no satisfaction in watching them scramble, only peace in knowing I hadn't needed to raise my voice to win. They had built their success on my work, and now the foundation was gone. Still, part of me wondered what came next. The fight was over, but the quiet after a storm can be just as strange. I wasn't angry anymore, I was free. And freedom, I was learning, feels a lot like the beginning of something new. 2 weeks later, I walked into my new office at Northline Financial Systems, carrying nothing but my laptop and a quiet sense of relief. The building smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, but it didn't feel heavy like Harbor Point had. Here, people greeted each other by name, not title. The receptionist smiled and handed me a badge that actually worked. "Welcome aboard, Pamela," she said. Simple words, but they landed deeper than she knew. My new boss, a calm woman named Erica, met me by the window and said, "We don't buy brilliance here. We recognize it." I laughed softly, surprised by how much that one sentence unknotted inside me. She showed me to a glass office overlooking the river. The desk was bare, waiting for me to fill it with something real. As I set down my bag, a flash of doubt flickered. What if I'd become too used to surviving instead of building? What if trust was another trap? Erica must have seen something in my face because she said gently, "Take your time. You don't have to prove anything." For the first time in years, I believed that. Over the next few days, I built new systems, not out of defense, but creation. When someone asked for my opinion, they listened. When I submitted a proposal, my name stayed on it. I stopped waiting for the next blow and started planning the next idea. One afternoon, during a team meeting, the CEO dropped by. He shook my hand and said, "I've heard great things. Glad to have you with us." There was no arrogance in his tone, just respect. After he left, I stared at the conference table, remembering all the times I'd sat in rooms where my work spoke, but I wasn't allowed to. This felt different. Whole. Friday evening, as sunlight slanted through the blinds, a notification pinged on my laptop. Todd Harrington has requested to connect. For a second, I just stared, hand frozen above the mouse. His profile still had that same grin in front of a chart, pointing upward, as if he'd learned nothing. I hovered, then clicked ignore, then, slowly, block. My reflection in the screen looked calmer than I'd ever seen it. I whispered, "Some lessons don't need to be taught twice." I packed up my bag, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment, watching the river shimmer outside the window. Freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and mine. On my last day of the year, I opened the drawer of my new desk and found the old flash drive I'd carried through every storm. It was small, scratched, and unremarkable, but it held the story of how I'd survived by keeping the truth close. I turned it over in my hand, thinking of late nights, quiet battles, and the moment everything finally shifted. Outside the window, the city glowed like it had forgiven me for staying too long in the wrong place. I smiled, tucked the drive back inside, and closed the drawer softly. Some souvenirs aren't for display. They're reminders. My phone buzzed with a message from Erica. Team dinner tonight. You in? I typed back, wouldn't miss it. For a second, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same face, different woman. The kind who doesn't wait for permission to build something worth owning. I picked up my coat and walked out, leaving the office lights dim behind me. The night air felt alive, full of space and new beginnings. I didn't destroy anyone. I just made sure the record showed what really happened. And in the end, the truth was the loudest thing I ever said. Looking back, I realized this story was never just about stolen work. It was about how quiet strength can outlast arrogance. I didn't shout. I didn't beg to be seen. I documented. Every late-night email, every change, every false smile became part of a record that would one day speak louder than I ever could. There was a cost, of course. I lost sleep. I lost trust. For months, I carried the weight of being dismissed by people who thought silence meant surrender. But I learned something powerful in that silence. Preparation is louder than protest. People like Todd rely on chaos. They count on you to react emotionally, to lose focus, to give them an excuse. The real win comes from keeping your head down and your evidence clean. The truth is, revenge doesn't need noise. It just needs time, proof, and patience. The day my documentation hit that boardroom, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a survivor who finally set the record straight. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this. Calm isn't weakness, it's control. When you prepare quietly, you become the storm no one sees coming. How to get started today. Keep your own paper trail, emails, notes, timestamps, everything. It's not paranoia, it's protection. Never react in anger. Breathe, step back, and let the facts do the fighting. Learn your worth before someone else decides it for you. If leadership mocks your caution, that's the first sign you're working above them. Remember, silence is not surrender, it's strategy. What's one time you stayed quiet, collected proof, and let the truth do the talking? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story.